After the death of Ethiopia's Prime Minister, fears of a dangerous political vacuum. As preparations for the state funeral of Meles Zenawi get underway, what next for the country and the region? And what will be the legacy of one of Africa's longest-serving leaders? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome, I'm Mike Hanna. Ethiopian Prime Minister Meles Zenawi died at the age of 57 after more than 2 decades in power. While thousands lined the streets of the capital to pay their respects to a politician they saw as a visionary and a fearless leader, there are others who regarded him in a less favourable light. Zenawi was a close ally of the West and the US in particular. Ethiopia received nearly $4 billion in foreign aid last year, a total of $6.23 billion from the US alone in the past decade. He was a leader in complete control, and though a carefully groomed successor is due to take over, some fear that in the absence of Zenawi's particular skills, the country could begin to fragment. Mohammed Addo reports from Addis Ababa.
Ethiopians mourn their departed leader. Hundreds gathered outside Ethiopia's national palace, where Meles Zenawi's body is lying in state, to pay their respects. It will remain here until the funeral arrangements are complete.
He has done great things for Ethiopia. We have seen a lot of change. The best we can do in his remembrance is to complete what he started.
Not only Ethiopia, but the African continent has lost a great leader. We pray for him.
Meles died of an undisclosed illness in a Belgian hospital after weeks of not being seen in public. Members of his family and senior government officials gathered at Addis Ababa airport to receive the casket draped in the national flag. Thousands of his supporters also came out on the streets of the capital as his body was being taken to the palace. Meles Zenawi has been praised for bringing development and economic growth to one of Africa's poorest nations, but his critics say they came at the cost of respect for democracy and human rights in Ethiopia. Under his leadership too, Ethiopia carved out a major role for itself in Africa and beyond, mediating in conflicts and assuming a lead position within the African Union. It is a role analysts now say Ethiopia will find difficult to continue.
That role was augmented by the leadership, very capable leadership at regional level by Meles, and the loss his days will bring a little bit of competence challenge for Ethiopia to continue that kind of role.
A committee made up of senior government officials is working on preparations for a state funeral as Ethiopians embark on a future without Meles at the helm of their country's leadership. The Ethiopian parliament has been recalled from recess to swear in Meles Zenawi's successor. Deputy Premier Haile Mariam Desalegn is expected to be sworn in as Prime Minister within the next 24 hours. He will most likely stay in power till 2015, when the current term of the ruling party comes to an end. Mohammed Addo for Inside Story, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Meles Zenawi was a towering political figure who shaped modern Ethiopia, but the legacy he leaves behind is being hotly debated. His economic policies that mixed a large state role with private investment helped the country achieve economic growth rates of as much as 12.6%, one of the fastest growing in Africa. Despite this, the average annual income is only $1,000. That's about $3 a day. And Ethiopia remains heavily dependent on agriculture, which accounts for 85% of employment. While Meles Zenawi got credit for a remarkable run of economic growth, he's also faced criticism for civil and human rights abuses in recent years. Ethiopia is ranked 174th out of 187 countries in the United Nations Development Programme's 2011 index, which measures life expectancy, education and living standards. Human rights groups have condemned a system in which political opposition and media have been stifled. Repression codified in 2009 by legislation that led to dozens of opposition figures being arrested and numerous journalists charged. Opposition members also accused Meles Zenawi of rigging the 2005 election, In subsequent demonstrations, at least 200 people were killed by army and police forces, and leaders of the opposition group that successfully contested the election were sentenced to life imprisonment on treason charges. So, will there be a leadership crisis in Ethiopia after Zenawi's death? To answer this question, we're joined by our guests. In Washington, D.C., David Shin, former U.S. ambassador to Ethiopia between 1996 and 1999. And in New York, Jawar Mohammed, researcher at Columbia University and political commentator on Ethiopian affairs. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Let's begin with David Shin. Is stability in Ethiopia guaranteed by this planned succession?
Of course, nothing is ever guaranteed, but frankly, I'm optimistic that there will not be a leadership crisis. There is a little bit of ambiguity in the Constitution that allows for a leadership change. It's not entirely clear what the role of the Deputy Prime Minister is, although that individual has now been elevated to the position of acting head of government. But where it goes from here is a little bit unclear. I'm convinced, however, that since Meles apparently knew well in advance of his death that he was ill and would not be able to complete his term, that he has made plans for some kind of a reasonable, stable succession. And I believe that will take place.
Well, certainly, Jawar Mohammed in New York, that Deputy Prime Minister referred to, Haile Mariam Desalegn, was brought in by Zenawi as an advisor a long time ago. He's been groomed as Deputy Prime Minister, Foreign Minister. So it does look as though preparation has been made for the succession. Do you think that this preparation is enough?
I also do hope that there will be no crisis that will lead to instability in the country. However, it's not really clear whether whether Haile Mariam will have the full authority of the Prime Minister. He is trying to fit into a big shoes that was left by a man who ruled the country for 21 years as an authoritarian, as a very skilled politician. He outmaneuvered most of his opponents, both within the party and outside the party. Haile Mariam lacks the experience, and he also lacks the political base to maintain that kind of discipline and that kind of order within the party. He comes from a small marginal group in the south. His experience is very brief, only 2 years at the federal government. And most importantly, the country's military establishment, the security, the bureaucracy, the economy is controlled by the power elites, the Tigrayans. They will definitely undermine his authority, and I cannot imagine a junior minister filling Meles's post. That's one. The second is, I think he is a temporary appointment, and behind him there is going to be a huge power struggle within the Tigrayan factions, and that power struggle could threaten his power as well as the stability of the ruling party.
Well, let's go now to Nairobi, where we are joined by Farah Abdul Samed. He's a specialist on the Horn of Africa at Chatham House. Welcome to you. The question, is there likely to be a political vacuum even though there is a chosen successor in place?
Thank you, David. Actually, I agree with Ambassador David, actually. There's no, we can't just speculate something, but I don't see any internal or domestic vacuum will start after the death of the Prime Minister. As you know, there's a very strong political base of the EBRDF government on the ground, which has been controlling the country in very straightforward, actually. And I think that someone will fill that, his shoes. As we know, Ethiopia in the last 20 years, since Meles was leading the ruling part of EBRDF, was very stable ruling part. And they, as long as they have that structure, nothing about vacuum we won't expect very much of that.
Well, David Shin in Washington, D.C., let's just take a look at the legacy. Certainly a startling economic success, particularly at a time when many parts of the world were truly struggling. But at a major price, some would contend. Do you think that this balance between economic advancement and what some would argue is internal repression was something that was unavoidable in this developing society?
I'm not sure I would argue that it was unavoidable. I think there certainly could have been more progress on the side of democratizing Ethiopia at a somewhat faster pace than what occurred during the 21 years of the Meles government. Having said that, it's important to put all of this in historical perspective. Ethiopia has been an authoritarian-run country for more than 2,000 years. And you don't change that overnight. And it's even going to be difficult for the successor government to Meles to make dramatic, rapid changes in that regard. I hope it happens, but it's just going to take a little bit more time. There is one other component, though, to, I think, the Meles legacy that was not mentioned, and that is his role in the region and his role in Africa. And that side of it, I think, is very positive.
Yes, indeed, and that is something that I do want to get to later on in this discussion. But Jawar Mohammed, that issue remaining with the specific legacy, that ability to attempt to balance economic advancement, a development of a country arising out of a truly brutal and dangerous civil war, but at the same time having to keep control, as it were. Do you think that now, in this very brief hindsight, this was achieved, or was it only done at the expense of that increase in democratic process?
I think Meles really missed a great opportunity to transform the country from its authoritarian tradition to a democracy. Remember, when he came to power, the polarized world ended and the Cold War ended. There was a great support within the international community for democratization. Within Ethiopia itself, after 17 years of civil war, the population was ready to close that chapter and move on to towards reconciliation, towards inclusive politics. And also, Meles did not face much of insurgency like his predecessors. A lot of people gave him an opportunity, but he did not seize that opportunity. And instead, what he did was he reversed even some of the early gains, such as federalism and other opening, by concentrating power at the hand of a single ethnic group. Also by reversing the opening in the press in the democratic progress. The last 5 years particularly, he moved back to the old authoritarian system and he emerged as a clear dictator. So we are going to really, look back and see how smart and shrewd and highly skilled and popular guy in the international arena made us miss 20 years to transform this country.
Well, Farah Abdul Samad in Nairobi, your view, was there an opportunity missed?
Well, I don't see, actually. I differ with the speaker in the other corner. When you see the Meles, what he inherited and the situation of Ethiopia and the history Ambassador David talked about, I think he went too far, and achieved a lot of things which someone never dreamed before. We're talking about 2,000 or more than that, autocratic system, which the previous regimes of the military and the empire of Haile Selassie never even talk the word of the democrats. And the way he came that 20 years, I can say that yes, there's challenges. And I don't agree with Jawar because there was opposing forces against him. Always there's a challenge in the neighboring country, not only the internal factors, because as you know, Ethiopia is surrounded so many, volatile regions. Somalia was there, Sudan was there, other regions was there always, and Eritrea just most recently. And I say, Meles, what he achieved, and the culture of the Ethiopians, and the transformation of the concept of Ethiopianism itself, and the way he transformed equal ethnic, nationalities, which never dreamed to live together.
Well, Jawar Mohammed, I want to get to that point that was raised a little bit earlier, and that is the regional role that was played by Zenawi. We heard mention of his immense position that happened in those talks between Sudan and North Sudan, South Sudan, absolutely critical part of getting that peace process in place. What is going to happen now to these type of processes in the absence of such a powerful figure?
No doubt he was a skilled negotiator, he was a skilled mediator, and he was doing what he was doing both in Sudan and Somalia, mostly because he was trying to prevent those countries becoming a hotbed for insurgency. However, no doubt that particularly in Sudan he played a positive role. In Somalia he was a part of the destabilizing factor. He was financing the warlords, and later he was very much part of the instability in Somalia. Now he's out of the picture. What will happen? I think that was a problem. I think the international community invested heavily on him. The diplomacy, the achievement that was gained in the region was largely through his personal drive. There wasn't really strong institutional involvement. Most of these achievements were done because of him. Yet, the military is still strong and the diplomatic corps seem to be strong. So if we find a good leader to replace him, we might be able to have that role. However, as long as power is not decentralized in Ethiopia, as long as there is always this exclusionist policies that keep the rest of ethnic groups outside the political power, instability in Ethiopia is very certain. We have been observing in the last 2 months, the last 10 months, a rise of Muslim movement that was protesting against the government involvement in their religion. We have highly dissatisfied and very huge unemployment of young people in the country. This could all destabilize Ethiopia, and this instability could definitely even negatively affect
Well, I'll
Sudan,
get back to this point of stability in a moment, if I may, Jawad. But I want to go on to David Shin at this point to discuss this issue. You pointed out there to a dichotomy in terms of the regional efforts. Peacemaking in Sudan, what many would regard as an invasion, a forced intervention in Somalia. How do you balance these type of actions out, David Shin?
Well, first, if you look at it from the standpoint of Ethiopian interests as opposed to American interests or a country on the outside, you have a rather different approach to the problem. I think you have to make a distinction between what the Meles government was doing in Sudan, which was largely focused on trying to help solve a problem, although there was some Ethiopian self-interest involved in that, and its approach, on the other hand, to Somalia, where Ethiopia looked at Somalia almost as an internal Ethiopian security issue because of the large Somali population in the Ogaden area and their links between that population and the neighboring Somali population. So in the case of Somalia, the government was clearly acting on behalf of its own self-interest. And I argued at the time of the invasion in 2006 that this was not a wise policy. I think Ethiopia erred by sending massive numbers of troops into Somalia at that time. So you can look at that in different ways, but you have to make the distinction whether you're looking at it from a strictly Ethiopian point of view or from the point of view of an outsider.
Well, Farouk Abdul Samad, how much of this do you think was driven by pressures from the West, from the US in particular?
Well, it could be some, but if you look the other way also around, what the Ethiopian and Meles doing currently in the last 20 years was more on national security interests. If you look Somalia, is more dependent on some internal security of the country, where you have a cross-border insurgents which can cross to the country, insurgents of Islamist insurgency, and most recently Al-Shabaab and the predecessor of the Al-Ittihad al-Islami, which has been also always was a threat to the national security of Ethiopia. On Sudan's side, I think he developed more on building trust between the both Sudanese and also helping the new southern Sudan to stand at its feet. And if you look at the way the Ethiopian army played a big role on stabilizing southern Sudan and training or mediating or actually acting in the middle way between the South Sudan. None other country will do that. And that was, in a way you can say, is outsider's interest, but in a way I can argue that was part of the national security.
David Shin, I want you to pick up on something that was mentioned a little bit earlier, and that is the Within Ethiopia, returning there away from the region itself, those differences, those divisions that a very powerful leader like Zenawi was able to contain, is there not the danger that these divisions, these fault lines within Ethiopian society could now begin to crack wide open?
That danger exists. There also may be an opportunity here. And the opportunity is that if the successor government does open up the system more to allow some of these differences to be expressed more publicly and more openly and in the political marketplace, you frankly might be able to diffuse some of this pent-up feeling. Now that's the optimistic scenario. And I could be wrong on that, but I think that is the best way out of the dilemma. If you continue to repress these elements, then I think you are going to have a serious problem down the road.
Well, Farah Abdul Samad, which way do you think the successor government is going to go? Repression? Or is it going to be that more optimistic avenue?
Well, I think a lot of the bursar and everyone else who is coming in the long term, not only the near term of the remaining years of transition, but I think everyone has to learn a lot of history. The Ethiopian government now, particularly the ruling party, has a long experience and history of the region, of the country, and has been very intimate with the Ethiopian public at large. I think they can learn a lot of things. They can transform these things and the remaining thing. But if I go back to one of the legacy Zenawi has left in this country is a lot of things which is very hardly actually to find another leader from the ruling party to fit his shoes. We know what he has done in the international community, and if you look on what he has done in Ethiopia, the way the Ethiopian has started the policy of ethnic nationalities, and how he always reformed the way of the governing and keeping Ethiopia together, which is very mosaic and very, very volatile, unfriendly nation is, if you look back the history, how the insurgents and rebellion was used to. And if you look the current prime minister, the deputy prime minister who is soon to take over the place is a professor who has been long time with the ruling party, from the regional government to the national to the foreign policy. And I think he is very, very competent to fill those shoes. And in the short term and the long term, for the future.
If I could just go to Jawad Mohammed on that particular point, though, why should this new government and this new leader act any different in terms of democratization than the predecessor did? Is there any reason why there should now be a greater drive towards greater transparency, greater democracy as the country goes on?
There is a growing buildup of tension in the country. There is the majority of the people feel they are excluded. The elite feel they are excluded from the power. The majority of the people feel that they are not beneficiaries of that trickle down from the said economic growth. As you know, the economy has been growing, but most of this economy has been stifled by the ruling party's corporation, which has dominated the economy in every sector for the last 20 years. So there is huge economic problem right now. The living cost in urban area is unbearable. The living cost and the farmers are facing a serious problem. Therefore, there is huge unemployment problem. These people can go out on the street. That's one. Second, the elites have kept the rest of the population outside there. True that this is some sort of coalition. However, it is pretty clear. Out of the whole command of the military, only one general is non-Tigrayan. This is not a sustainable system. If the country is to continue in a path of sustained growth, it is essential that the new government open up the political system. They can do this, one, by starting to release the political prisoners, by allowing the exiled political parties and politicians to return, by also inviting a national dialogue that involves scholars, intellectuals, and religious leaders. Otherwise, if they continue with this policy of forcing everybody to fall under one party and to exclude the rest from the the pie, I expect an implosion of conflict, popular uprising, and something that look like the Syrian situation.
Well, maybe the legacy will be judged in the weeks and months and even years ahead. At that point, thank you to our guests. In Washington, D.C., Ambassador David Shin. In New York, Jawar Mohammed. And in Nairobi, Farah Absul Samed. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From everyone here, I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.